Hello, my lovelies. Jenny O here, the author with no last name, and it is October! I thought I could use this month to celebrate the little-known hashtag called Booktober and review some of the traditionally published books I've been reading. Since I've moved, my library is now a 5-minute walk up the street, which is one reason to love a small town, I guess. I've been playing catch-up with fantasy and sci-fi, and my awesome librarians of my tiny library have been really helpful with ordering the books I want and ordering books they think I might like. Shout out to awesome librarians! Also, a shout out to my really amazing library system here in upstate New York, the Finger Lakes Library System, which has so many branches and a really good collection of books. As always, because I'm an author and a development editor myself, my reviews will be my opinions phrased in author terms. Your mileage may vary. In no particular order, let's do it, let's get right to it. Brotherband, The Outcasts, by John Flanagan. In Scandia, there is one way to become a warrior: the trials of the Brothers Band. Hal Mickelson and his best friends Stig and Stefan are finally old enough for the warrior trials. There are 28 boys, enough to form 3 groups, and Hal finds himself unwittingly the leader of one against 2 of the more popular sets of boys. All the boys in his group are generally outcasts around the village, but they embrace this and call themselves the Herons after Hal's ship. Thorn, an old warrior who used to be the toughest warrior in the village, makes himself the mentor of the Herons. Whatever team wins will be given the honor of guarding the Endomal, a large piece of amber with a dragon talon in it, for the night. Unknown to the boys, though, pirates are in the area and they've set their sights on the Endomal. I didn't finish this book. This was yet another book written by someone who was 20 years into the industry. The plot has no structure. We jump from viewpoint to viewpoint, especially in the beginning. Like, we meet a group of characters and you think, oh, this is going to be the main POV. No, we're just being shown what's happened to turn this guy into an alcoholic. Then you meet another character and it's Hal's mom, and you're like, oh, okay, maybe she's going to be a point of view character. And then we skip around and we meet some traders, and eventually we do get to Hal and the boys, and Hal and the boys, are having a great time at Brotherband Chronicles trials and, working things out, and Hal's figuring out how to be a leader and everything. And the problem is Hal and the boys are not tied to the pirates who want the amber with the dragon talon in it in any way, shape, or form. They're off doing their own thing, and then the pirate is doing his thing, and of course Eric, the leader of the village, is like, he's very suspicious of this guy, but nobody's telling the boys anything. So the story really starts at the last chapter when, spoiler, the stupid thing gets stolen. Okay? And I don't know why this MacGuffin, this Endomal, this piece of amber, is so important either. It rolled up on the beach one day, and it's just been important to them ever since, I guess. So, the whole plot of this is going to be stolen is just plastered on with a trowel, but it has nothing to do with what Hal and his friends are going through in the Brotherband trials as the outcasts until the very, very end. Now, Hal and his friends and the slice of life stuff that they're going through in the trials is fun. It's really, they're a great group of characters. I guess other people say they're recycled from the Ranger's Apprentice, but whatever, I haven't read those, so, you know, I'm getting to know them for the first time here. So, you know, Hal and Stefan and Jesper and Stig and all that, they're fun characters. I find myself laughing at what's going on. And at the same time, I'm just, you know, Hal's like, I don't want to be the leader, he doesn't want to put himself forward, except he's the only one with any type of leadership experience, or building experience, whatever. So it's like, we're hearing the lives of these boys, but we don't really know what they want. Do they even really want to be great warriors, or are they doing this just because this is what you do in Scandia? Like, maybe he doesn't really want to be a great warrior. Maybe he really wants to build ships like Anders does and, you know, help traders. I don't know, because we're not shown or told any of this for any of these guys. They're doing Brotherband training because that's what you do. So I was just kind of waiting for the story to begin, and it didn't begin until the end of the book, when the MacGuffin actually got stolen, and, you know, they were all in disgrace, so they're gonna run away and go after the MacGuffin and, you know, redeem themselves. So I was like, no, I can't. I'm done. I can't do this. So I didn't finish it. Mrs. Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs. On his dying grandfather's last words, Jacob Portman ends up across the sea from Florida, USA, to try and find closure from the nightmares he's had of his grandfather's death and the monster he saw in the dark. Solving the riddle his grandfather gave him leads him to a house of peculiars trapped in time. Humans who have extra powers such as levitation, necromancy, super strength, and those who can see monsters like Jacob and Jacob's grandfather. He's not the only one searching for the house and the peculiars in it. A group of peculiars tried to become immortal and turn themselves into mindless, cannibalistic wights. They think if they use more time-stopping powered peculiars, they'll succeed in achieving immortality this time, and Jacob has unwittingly led them right to the peculiars they need. 3 ginger snaps. Just because Jacob is peculiar, it doesn't make him interesting. There is a real lack of conflict in this book for over the first half of it. I was reading it, and I was sitting here, and I was like, I swear, I've tried reading this book before. This feels really familiar, and I swear I got halfway through it the first time and put it down. So this time I really did try to get to the end, and once again, the end is where the story actually starts, go figure. The story doesn't start where Grandpa dies. The story starts for Jacob, in my opinion, when Jacob has a choice of whether or not he's going to stay or go at Mrs. Peregrine's home. This conflict is kind of slapped in there in the middle of everything, really haphazardly. I never get the sense from Jacob that he's as lonely as he should be. Ransom portrayed him as this outcast and stuff, but there's no tension or emotion. You know, Jacob's not having these emotions about being lonely. Now, this is one of those fundamental type of motivations or, fears. The fears of being alone. This is something almost everybody can relate to. And I'm just like, it's not there. And then, and there's not enough, continued state of whimsy or characterization from the first chapter where when we meet Jacob there, he's building this tower out of adult diapers, I think. He's making the Empire State Building out of adult diapers in this drugstore that he works at. And so we get this first kind of sense of whimsy off of him, and then there's nothing else. like, were suddenly all of a sudden taking up way too much time, and, you know, oh, his grandfather died, and he's got to help clean out the house, and now he's got to go get psychiatric help because he's having all these nightmares and PTSD from seeing the monster that they've convinced him doesn't exist, and, like, there's not enough whimsy in it to make it feel really greatly fantasy-like, and there's, at the same time, there's not enough horror in it to give me this sense of dread or whatever, and there's not enough foreshadowing to give me enough sense of the beginning, or the beginning makes sense with the villain of the spoiler at the end, and there is this false conflict in there too. If your conflict is, I can't tell you something, you really need to rethink your conflict of the book, because that's what Miss Peregrine was telling him. Oh, I can't tell you stuff because you weren't ready to believe us. That's just a stalling tactic, and it's a way to make the readers resentful at the writing, at you as an author, rather than at the characters themselves. And once again, the story starts at the end of the book, and I'm just not finding Jacob and all the different peculiars interesting enough to want to go pick up Hollow City to see if it gets any better. I think this book was really published because of the conceit of the old pictures. I guess he wanted to publish a picture book of all these old pictures he'd been finding at the flea markets. You can find them in some antique stores too. I've been noticing them around here in antique stores around here. He wanted to publish these books of peculiar children's pictures, you know, where they were, oh, we can make this child look like she's levitating and stuff like that. And he was convinced to create a narrative out of the old pictures. And I think the story itself needed more time to be developed, and I don't know, the pictures chosen were kind of, some of them made sense and some of them didn't, type of thing. So published because of the pictures, honestly. Tooth and Claw by Joe Walton. On the death of their Falter, Ban Agnornan, his 4 children are set into a disarray. There was a squabble over the inheritance, and the brother-in-law Davorak took more than his fair share, to the anger of the younger children. Pen, a parson, and Davorak must take between them their 2 sisters, Celindra and Hainer, until they can be wed. And the youngest brother, Avon, is determined to get his inheritance back through the law and the courts, if he must. But society's rules must be kept, and Hainer doesn't want to anger her brother-in-law and be turned out, while Celindra finds herself falling in love with someone much higher than her station. Cher, whose mother, Benanandi, is trying to control his life and doesn't think Celindra is good enough for him. And society is about to be upended unless a missing heiress can be found. That is, if she wants to be found. 5 gender snaps. Do you like Austen? Do you like dragons? Then you'll like this book, which was pitched to be as Pride and Prejudice with dragons, and I can't refute it. Some might say it's a more Victorian story like The Family Parsonage, but really it had, to me, a lot of classic Regency-era Austen-style characterizations. It does not fit 100% into Pride and Prejudice, and it doesn't fit 100% into The Family Parsonage. You know, it's not a rehashed storyline, but you've got the elements from both stories there. You have classic Austen-style characters, including overbearing aunts and, young women being put into situations where they need to find a husband so they don't end up destitute. lots of proposals, and a society with lots of fussy rules, which in this case involves fancy hats and cannibalism, because dragons. There is, I think, one thing that may put off many modern readers, and it's the Austinian language used in the prose, or even the Victorian language, I guess. I know there were a lot of readers of Austen out there, and they like the type of way Austen wrote, the type of prose that she used, which was very common at the time Austen wrote, but it's not at all the same style of prose that we use today for modern reading. It's just, they're not looking for fantasy to get their Austen binge. Like, they're not looking for a story that's literally about intelligent dragons who, decide part of the inheritance is who gets to eat how much of dad's body type of thing. They're not looking for that, and where a lot of fantasy readers aren't used to the formal prose Austen wrote. They're more used to Tolkien's style of prose, which is different than Austen's style of prose. But, I was having a little hard time hacking through it myself. Once I got into the flow of it, I was okay with it. So I can see what this book was trying to do, to be an Austinian or even a Victorian style of story, and it does that very, very well. If this book was an experiment, I think it was successful, and I wish there were more like it. Give me Bridgerton with dragons, okay? Just do it. Just give me Bridgerton with dragons. I really, really enjoyed this. Even the world building was really cool. I like the way the maidenly blush to the dragons, the female dragons, and how the parsons and the servants had to bind their wings so they couldn't fly. The hats were cool. That was a cool thing. Like the hats were used in more than one way. Partially to, you had your mourning hats, which is typical, then you had society hats and party hats, and then you had hats for the justice system, and hats for walking around town, and when you were going to church and when you weren't going to church. So, and there was a whole religious aspect there too. So it was just kind of a really cool setup, world building setup, and a bunch of, Austinian characters plugged into it. And it worked really well. So I really enjoyed it. And if you like Austen and if you like dragons, I think you would enjoy it too. Leviathan Wakes by James S. Corey. When the water hauler, the Canterbury, is blown up by forces unknown while responding to a distress call, Holden and the rest of his surviving crew are thrust into a matter of survival and revenge. Meanwhile, on Cerise, where the Canterbury was headed, Miller has been hired down to track down one Julie Mao, who is supposed to be on the ship in distress. Miller's investigation eventually costs him his job and sends him, and Holden, and Julie's fate together as the system is tossed onto the brink of war. And did I mention there were zombies? I did not finish this book. I got halfway through this book and realized I was reading a book about two white guys having their middle-age crises. In space! Look. Okay, this is a well-written book. The prose is fine. They had a great beta reader group behind them that included George R.R. Martin, and I guess there was another famous space opera writer in there too, and a physicist. They had plenty of people, and like an editor or something. They just had plenty of people behind them to make sure this was a well-written book. The characters, the two male characters are well-written type of thing. I can see why it got published. if you like space opera, I can understand why this book got published. Even though it's like 50 pages longer than my first book and the font is smaller. So, I just kept waiting to see something that I haven't seen before. Something groundbreaking, between Asimov and Star Wars Expanded Universe and Doom or Dread. And I was just reading going, this reads like it would be a great TV show. If it's a TV show, the pace would have been a lot faster. So I can understand that this is the first book for the Expanse series here. So I can understand why it got picked up and actually turned into a television series by the Sci-Fi Network. And it has supposedly had really great ratings and loyal followers. I mean, I think it did better than Killjoys. Here is my issues. It lacks both humanity and the personal connections to tie our two middle-aged white guys to the overall deeply overcomplicated plot where the women in bi-POCs are being used as props. What I mean about humanity is very little of the war going on is shown in any sort of sympathetic way. You don't, we're being told ships are battling each other, things are being blown up, and, there's riots at Cerise, and there's more murders going on, but we're not seeing the war humanized in any side of fashion down on the ground. This is part of things being personal. Miller and Holden don't know any of the people who are being blown up in these ships, but they don't know people on these stations that are, they turned their array inward and they were, people, I think they were invaded by the Martian forces or something like that. There was no personal connections between what was going on in the system to Holden and Miller. And there's no, they don't know who instigated things. Holden got completely sidetracked from investigating and finding out who was doing it. And then Miller, who was trying to find Julie, well, eventually they do find Julie, and she's dead because she's been taken by this virus, which was turned her into this weird-ass zombie. And there went my interest. I mean, that was kind of like the plot they were setting up is, Julie is important. She's the prop. She's the stick that Holden unwittingly and Miller wittingly were chasing after. She was the prop to keep you interested and keep tension in the storyline. Where'd they find Julie? Okay. So, and as I was reading, I was just trying to find a personal connection between Holden or Miller on who started the war, and it was just not there. Let's take Star Wars as an example for how things were personally affecting the characters, okay? There's a lot of personal connections set up in the first Star Wars, the 1977 one that was originally called Star Wars and is now called A New Hope. So we have Princess Leia. She received the Death Star plans and is trying to get them to the rebellion when she's captured. So Grand Moff Tarkin, he takes the Death Star to Alderaan, her home planet, and threatens to blow it up if she doesn't reveal where the rebellion is and where the plans are going. So she gives up an old base and he destroys Alderaan. Anyway, so that's very, very personal to Leia there. There was cause for Grand Moff Tarkin to be chasing after her, and when he did capture her, he took her to a place that was personal, blew it up, and actually instigated a much bigger war than he could have. I mean, the rebellion was kind of little before then. He blew up an entire planet, and now you have a whole group of people who weren't on the planet and counted that planet as their home planet against you because you destroyed it. And then, you have Obi-Wan, who has a personal connection to Darth Vader because they were master and student. And then you have, Luke, who is on the hero's journey. And he wants to get off Tatooine. So a lot of his story arc is built on his wants. He wants to get off of Tatooine. He wants to rescue Princess Leia. That is fueling the story and keeping the story moving forward. So there are all these personal connections, and that's just stuff set up in A New Hope. That's not counting anything that was added in for The Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi, and the old expanded universe legend story about Han Solo. We're not even going to discuss any of that and how things how Han was connected personally to what was going on. So, there is none of this being set up or foreshadowed in The Expanse. I just know Holden's just this guy who got kicked out of the military because he was mouthy, and, Miller's used to be a cop and he's now an alcoholic and he's a bad cop type of thing. And the pace was just so slow. You want to figure out who's doing this, and then the zombies show up. And it's just like, oh my god, no, don't. If this devolves into a zombie story, I don't like zombies. There's not a lot you can really do with zombies other than kill them. And then there are the women and bi POC characters in the book. They're there, but they're there to fuel the motivations of our middle-aged white guys, and it feels like really kind of gross. There was a comment in there too about how Julie might have been sexually assaulted, so she went to the gym to learn jujitsu, and she learned her lesson. It was just really, really disgusting. I don't know if it's the two guys behind it, or if it was, because George R.R. Martin's in the beta writing group, or what. So, it's a really long book. It would make a really great television show, and I guess it did. I haven't seen any of it to be able to compare it. And it is, the prose is well written, and, I can kind of feel myself in there with the characters. It was just, I was waiting for those personal connections, and I was waiting to feel the humanity of the story of this great war going on, and it never happened. And if it doesn't happen by halfway through the book, it's really not going to happen in the next half of the book, so I just stopped. Have you read any of these books? What's your opinion? Sound off in the comments below. If any of these books sound interesting to you, please support your local library, and if it's anything like mine, they'll tell you how much money you're saving. Woot! Also, please try supporting the authors of books you really love by buying their books and leaving them reviews, and most importantly, telling your friends. Happy Booktober! Thanks for listening. Bless, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.